Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
9 out of 10 Idahoans say they care about wildlife, but only 1 out of 4 Idahoans actually help pay to manage it. That's a problem for the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, the agency responsible for all of the wildlife in the state. So Fish and Game officials have set up a summit to talk about it, but we'll talk about it first. Stay tuned. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. The weekend of August 24th, Fish and Game officials are inviting Idahoans to join in a conversation. They want to talk about the future of wildlife management in the state, and at the heart of the problem is money. A 1938 voter initiative created the Idaho Department of Fish and Game and gave it the responsibility for managing all the wildlife in the state. That's almost 10,000 plant and animal species, covering 97% of Idaho's biodiversity. To do that, the agency received about $77 million last fiscal year. 57% of its budget comes from fishing and hunting licenses, the rest from federal excise taxes on hunting and fishing gear. The agency receives no general funds from the state. But there's not enough money to properly manage all the game and non-game animals and plants in the state. So what gets funded and what doesn't? Many hunters and anglers want their license dollars spent just on those animals they pursue. But revenue from licenses has remained flat, even falling, as fewer Idahoans hunt and fish. Far more people participate in wildlife watching, but they don't buy a license to do that, so they don't contribute to the agency's bottom line. Right now, 1% of the Fish and Game's budget goes toward protecting and managing the 80% of wildlife that's not hunted or fished. With increasing costs, declining revenue, and competing needs, the Fish and Game Agency is at a crossroads. So the department has organized the Idaho Wildlife Summit to gather together the folks to talk about the agency and help craft a plan for the future. Joining me to talk about the summit and what we can expect in Pocatello, Randy Budge, Fish and Game Commissioner. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Joan. Happy to be here.
Also joining us in Pocatello is Wendy Greenlow with P2 Solutions. Wendy, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
And joining us in our Boise studio is Virgil Moore, Director of the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. Director, wish to be here.
Thank you, Joan.
Also joining us is Steve Adler, Clearwater Chapter Representative for Idaho for Wildlife. Sir, thank you for coming down.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And of course, we want you to join the conversation. You can send me an email or post on our Facebook page. Be sure to keep it brief. Go ahead and send it to dialogue@idahoptv.org. Let's jump into the first question, and that's for you, sir. Why have a statewide meeting? Why have a summit?
Well, we need to always talk about wildlife in the state of Idaho. Our legacy of wildlife is so important to all Idahoans. Our theme is Idaho's wildlife belongs to you, and we need a chance to listen to what Idahoans have to say about wildlife and their needs so we can figure out how to meet those needs in the future.
Randy, why is it important for you as a commissioner to have this, and why can't things just stay as they are now?
Well, I think this summit provides a real great opportunity to have a dialogue. And we need to have a dialogue with our hunters, our fishers, our trappers, and basically all of the citizens of Idaho who love wildlife, whether it's hunting or fishing, or whether it is photography, or whether it's simple viewing. We need to have a good discussion and hear from you and help chart out the future. We have lots of problems, and we hope to have a dialogue about those problems and be able to have at least a start towards some of the solutions to make sure that we're doing what we're expected to do by the citizens.
So you're one of those citizens, Steve, as a sportsman. Do you think this is a good idea?
Yeah, obviously, there's some apprehension from the sportsman groups, but I feel that with Virgil's admonition to listen to us and let us speak and voice our concerns is not all bad.
One of the things that has impacted the Fish and Game Agency are the number of federal mandates, essentially federal animals that you need to protect. Talk about how the makeup of what you do has changed in the last even 10 years.
We have a lot more species that we're expected to jump in and come up with management plans, biological information, data, understanding, involvement in legal processes. The Endangered Species Act has been around for 30 plus years, but still the increased use of that act with less common species has resulted in us having to jump in and get a lot of work done. And we don't want to make mistakes based on ignorance. We want to make our best decisions based on the best science and information we've got. Pygmy rabbits are a good example of that. Thought to be very scarce and rare. We got a grant, went out and did some pygmy rabbit work and discovered they're a lot more abundant than we thought. That's the kind of work I think Idahoans expect us to do for those other 80% of the species when and if we can get the resources.
Commissioner, how has the threat to big game animals differed from the threat to non-game animals? Are the threats that those creatures are facing different, or are they the same?
Well, each species has a different threat, but I think generally there is a threat that applies somewhat to all wildlife, whether it's big game or whether it's non-game species. And the basic threat is the changing climate and environment in which we live. We have a population that's tripled since the Kit Commission was formed in 1938. So that growing population brings with it development, recreation, subdivision, mines, dams. All of those things affect habitat. And as we all know, to have a viable wildlife population, the most important thing to have is habitat. So we need to be able to manage that habitat in order to protect our species. And so that is a challenge, I think, that applies almost all wildlife. Some of them use common habitat and some have specific habitat, but generally all wildlife is going to be affected by that, whether it's huntable species or non-game species.
Well, you talked about the shift in population. The Department of Fish and Game has some numbers of what people are doing in Idaho, and let's show a couple of those. The numbers of the number of people who are out hunting and fishing, and who are wildlife watchers. Like you have you can add all the hunters and anglers together, you still have more people out wildlife watching. Where did you come up with the numbers, sir?
Those are from surveys that are done on a every 5-year basis within the state or on a 10-year basis nationally. And we see continuing demand for our outdoor recreation based on wildlife. I mean, wildlife-based recreation is a huge thing that people want to do. Hunting is pretty stable. Fishing is increasing, but wildlife viewing is increasing even more. And a lot of it has to do with the investment in time to undertake that activity and the skill necessary to do it. But we still see a huge demand out there for the resources that we manage.
And each of these different areas of sportsmanship, the outdoor activities, have their own revenue source. Let's look at some of the revenue dollars that come in from these different activities. I think hunting is our first activity. It brings in about $284 million in retail sales and $33 million in taxes. Anglers, fishing come in about $315 million in retail sales, $37 million in taxes. And wildlife, actually, they do contribute some taxes. There's obviously retail sales for the state of Idaho of $265 million and $35 million in taxes. Now, that $35 million in wildlife watching taxes, that's not money that goes to the department, correct?
It is not. We get no general funds, Joan. And I think the important thing to recognize is that wildlife is important to the state, not just because we care, but it also has an economic value. You add all these numbers up, it's about $1 billion a year worth of economic activity. It's generating a huge sum of general revenue to the state because of all the jobs and activities that people have. Sportsmen spend a lot of money. Bird watchers and other wildlife enthusiasts spend a fair amount of money. The difference is sportsmen have an excise tax on their equipment. Their 10% of their hunting equipment, 10% of their fishing equipment goes to a trust fund that comes back to the state based on license sales. The wildlife enthusiasts who watch wildlife have no similar mechanism to fund those types of activities and contribute to the demands that they place on management of those resources. And so part of it is that our model hasn't matured with the demands of the people. Sportsmen have always been the leaders in conservation funding in this nation. Congress has followed that demand with additional programs. And what we need to do is talk about how do we get the rest of that demand that's out there taken care of.
Wendy, I want to bring you in on the conversation. You're part of the team that's putting together the Idaho Wildlife Summit. It's not just going to happen in Boise, it's going to happen in 7 locations around the state. How is the experience in, say, Idaho Falls going to be different, or Pocatello, or Coeur d'Alene, or Twin Falls, or Salmon going to be different from the experience in Boise?
Well, we hope it won't be very different. Our goal is to have connections through the internet and video conferencing that'll make it an identical experience for people regardless of where they participate. In fact, we're going to try to design it so that people that, for whatever reason, don't want to come into one of the locations can participate in some way from home through their personal computers.
And why make this change? Why not have it in one place where you can get a concentrated people who are willing to spend and devote their attention to just that item?
Well, I think in part because not everybody has the ability to get in the car and go to Boise. It's a big state, that's a long drive. But another reason is I think people feel more comfortable being closer to home, and so we want to create that opportunity for them to participate regardless of what part of the state they live in.
And there's also some there are surveys you're going to take with that sort of thing. Could you tell us about that?
Well, there's 2 different things that we're going to do. One of them will be an internet-based polling process where throughout the duration of the summit, we'll be asking for people to answer questions about the information that's been presented, how they feel about what they think is most compelling about what they've heard. And that'll give us real-time data that we can immediately present to the audience about what people think, what their values are, how they're reacting to the presentations and the information that's been shared. So that's one way that we'll be involving people. We'll also have another small group conversation about issues that we think are really important to most people that live in Idaho about wildlife and wildlife conservation.
So, Steve, you've seen this a model and this approach. Do you think it's going to work?
Possibly. Obviously, I'm supporting and representing sportsman groups. We have 14 thus far on the committee, and we want to know where our dollars going and our management. We've gone through a lot of challenges with predators and wolves that have depleted our big game and our elk, and we'd like to see more restoration of big game and opportunity.
If the dollars shift, if there's some option on the table that shows people who are not hunters and anglers should start contributing more to Fish and Game so that wildlife, that's going to tip the scale on actually, who controls the set of priorities, because you dance with the one that brung you to the ball. If more wildlife people are putting money into saying that should be a different set of priorities, how do you feel about that? Are you ready for that shift?
Depends on who we're dancing with, obviously. So we're nervous, obviously. There's a lot of conservation groups that may be too much on the environmental anti-hunting agenda type. We're going to be really cautious of that. But we feel that and I know I've talked to a lot of members, we have a lot of value we could bring to the department to restore big game, which will produce more revenue for the department. And we do have a lot of opportunity and ideas to run by Virgil and the staff regarding that.
We have a Facebook question for you, Mr. Director. Do all license fees go to the department?
Yes, all license fees have to go to the department, and they can't be diverted for any other purpose than wildlife management. And the commission makes the decision on the budget priorities, and the legislature approves that. But the money cannot go to any other purpose.
So that 1% of the budget that heads up for that 80% of the wildlife, is that enough?
No, it's not. The charted demands that we have already out there far exceed the resources we've got. We get money from the license plates, the wildlife license plate series, the elk, the cutthroat trout, and the bluebird. That money goes to the wildlife diversity or non-game wildlife program. We get a little bit of money from a check-off on the income tax, but that's just about decreased to zero. And we get some federal money to match those license plate monies. That's it. we get a few contracts now and then from various entities and agencies and grants, but by and large that program is self-supported by those funds that come in.
Randy, what choices have you made as commissioner, programs you've decided to cut that you would like to see reinstated, or those programs that you have funded that you think we need to perhaps fund more or perhaps eliminate on the other side?
Well, I wouldn't say at this point that we have been faced with dramatic cuts of programs. There's certainly been cuts in staff and some things. I think what we're most concerned about as a commission is the future. And I think we recognize that we have a relatively flat base of hunters. We have an aging population. The recruitment of youth is not going real well because of the competition. And so we see a relatively flat funding base as weighed against ever-increasing demands on the department. So looking forward as a commission, I think we're concerned that we'll be able to fund the department's required activities going forward in the future. And we either are looking at a smaller, leaner department that will not be able to do things other than manage for core hunting and fishing, or we have to consider broadening the base so that we can have fund all of the activities that are being placed on us, as Virgil's discussed, under the Endangered Species Act and a lot of non-game species, and basically just meet the growing demand for the department's resources and services that they provide as a result of development and growing population and mines and dams and the like. And that's really the purpose of the summit, to have a debate on this issue and hope to have some good input and start to chart the future. And if we're going to broaden the funding base, that will be a real difficult challenge, and we'll have to find ways to do that.
Steve, are there funding options you would like to discuss?
Yes, as far as options, I feel that if we can get input and provide input to the department about how to better manage, they will have more than adequate funding from sportsman dollars. One of the things about the summit is we can throw out ideas that we've never had the opportunity before. The Fish and Game Commission meetings give us about 3 minutes in person. That's not adequate time. So this way we can sit down with the department commission and say, look, here's an idea from an outsider. I'm a businessman. I've got some ideas. I want you to hear it. You know, we can build value, bring in more money, and provide the funding that's necessary. And we think that that can be facilitated through the consensus of the sportsmen.
I'll throw this both to you, Mr. Director, and you, Mr. Commissioner. Are there any options that are off the table?
Well, from my viewpoint, not. I think at this point, all options are available, and that's really the purpose of the summit. We want to hear from sportsmen. We want to hear from conservationists. We want to develop a level of enthusiasm for conservation management of our wildlife in the state. And if that enthusiasm can be developed, where we have the public engaged in protecting this important resource and the habitats within which they live, then I think we can move forward on how can we develop new funding mechanisms. It could be some states use a small sales tax, others have conservation taxes, some have some broad general funding out of the general budget. But I don't like a number of states has none of that. Right now we rely exclusively on sportsmen's dollars from one source or another. And that's the question that's being presented, and one we need to have a good discussion on and hopefully have some answers. And once we gain that information from the summit, then I think it will provide some further guidance for the commission to help chart the future.
Well, the options, as Randy told you, are open. We're looking and anxious to hear ideas, options, whatever you want to call them. I'm excited about the fact that we need to have a conversation. That's what this is. We want to sit down around a table, literally, and talk about the needs of Idaho's wildlife and the legacy we want for our kids and our grandkids in this state for wildlife. That includes the continued core management of vital hunting and fishing heritage that's so important to this state. But that hunting and fishing heritage that we have, that I feel honored to have the opportunity to be part of the management of, is in need of additional support from everybody. And as a hunter, as an angler, I enjoy watching all wildlife. when I'm out hunting and angling. And so it's important to me to know and understand about the flickers and the other wildlife that I see while I'm out there, just as I was this last week while I was salmon fishing with my wife. And we had our bird book, and we were sitting in the boat waiting for a salmon to take the rod down. So I'm anxious to hear what everybody has to say. I'm anxious to update the strategic thinking the department has.
Well, it's a good point that in those lists of numbers, who's doing what here in Idaho, there are people who are both anglers
Absolutely.
and hunters, and also almost all are also wildlife watchers.
That's true.
Is there a funding stream you can see that Idaho could not easily tap into, but tap into that really does just get those people who are wildlife watchers?
I don't believe that we have that vehicle figured out for Idaho. I will tell you, I don't believe it will be a general tax revenue source that will come from general funds. It's going to be something that's going to be modeled after what the conservation activities of hunters and anglers has been used since the 30s. Some way that they can contribute for the activities that they use in a manner that gets resources to the states, who are the wildlife managers, who manage it in trust. That's what I see as the possible world of vehicles out there. And there's dozens of different tools that folks have used.
Is there a particular state that you would like to model Idaho's after?
Oh, that's almost a trick question. The state that did this first, the state that did this first was Missouri, and Missouri did a 1/8% sales tax back in the 70s. It took them 10 years of talking about this, and they got it through, and they've had to defend it a couple of times. But I know the director from there, and I've talked to him several times, and his comment to me is, this hasn't decreased anything that we do for hunting and fishing. In fact, we have better managed hunting and fishing now because we're dealing with, as Randy put it, the habitats for all critters that they depend on. They're working in education about conservation across a broader range. Support for that legacy in Missouri is extremely large. There are other states that have done things like that. There are other tools than a sales tax that can get at that have been used. So there isn't a necessarily perfect vehicle. I think our state is unique, and we will, if we decide we want to do that, then we can talk about what the vehicle is that we need to move forward. Steve has ideas. I need to hear those ideas. Other folks have ideas. Hopefully, Joan, you'll be there and you can give us your ideas.
If I so choose to participate, how do I get involved?
Was that question for me?
It was indeed. How would someone go about getting involved?
Well, the first thing they need to do is register to attend the summit, and then come. And we hope people will come with an open mind and excitement about exploring ideas together. We're expecting a lot of people. We could have, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people participate statewide, and that's a lot of people to talk to and interact with, and we hope that people will come with an open mind and be willing to listen to ideas that other people bring to the table. We're hoping that the dialogue will be big enough and cordial enough that everybody who participates will have a chance to contribute their ideas, and then we can start working on, what are the patterns, what are the themes, what do we have in common, find what based on aspirations and goals and perspectives and values, what Idaho would like to see in terms of wildlife conservation.
If you're going to be watching from home, do you still have to register?
Yes.
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
Well,
the answer is we would like everybody to register. We need the registration for the events that we're having so we can plan for the services we're going to provide. But certainly if you're going to participate from home, I believe there is a way for you to register so we know who is participating.
And it's not, it doesn't cost anything.
It does not.
Make it clear,
there is no
there's
cost.
No charge.
We have a lot of sportsmen's groups who are contributing funds to make this work, and we certainly appreciate any contributions folks have. We have an active campaign to raise the revenue necessary for this, and we're well on our way.
And could you tell me what the Idaho Cafe is? That's something that's on the agenda. Wendy, what is that?
Well, it's modeled on an idea that's called a World Cafe. What it is it's an opportunity to have small group discussions. We'll be arranging people in conversations of 4 people and spend some time talking about a series of 5 different questions. Every once in a while we'll mix people up a little bit so they get to talk to different people. But it's just basically a conversation that allows an opportunity to participate. Someone mentioned earlier how frustrating normal public hearings are, where you get 2 minutes each at the podium. And we're trying to not do that. Have trying to provide an opportunity for everybody to have a chance to talk about important questions that matter to them, and to do that, have those conversations with people they might not have ever had a chance to meet before. So that's what if you're interested, there's books out there on World Cafe, but we're calling it the Idaho Cafe because we're going to be doing it here.
And of course, you can go to the Dialogue website at idahoptv.org. If you go click on Dialogue and go to this program's show page, you'll find links. You can also go to the Idaho Fish and Game Department as well. So there's links available to find out. We're almost out of time. I want to give at least the 3 of you a chance to ask or answer that question. What do you hope will be the result? And Randy, why don't we start with you in Pocatello?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, what I hope the result is some renewed enthusiasm by all of the citizens of Idaho to protect and preserve their wildlife heritage that we all love.
That sportsmen get a voice. We get to be heard, and we know our money is going to go to the right places.
Are you afraid that it's not?
We're apprehensive, obviously, because this is all new. And when we hear, like I said, of environmental groups and things, we've seen that divisiveness of the environment, and as far as the country, it's affected us, it's affected the department. We want to make sure that we're restoring and rebuilding our herds, and the money is getting on the ground.
Commissioner.
Well, I hope that we get an updated understanding of what hunters, anglers, and wildlife enthusiasts in general want for their wildlife and what they want from the service that the Fish and Game Agency, our department, does for them. We work for them, and we hold in public trust their wildlife. It does belong to them, and I'm anxious to hear from them. That's what I hope to accomplish, is updating an understanding of that.
And how would you define success for this summit?
Success will be defined by the folks coming out of there with a renewed energy toward conservation of wildlife in this state that builds on our long legacy in the state of Idaho of managing wildlife for the future.
All right. Thank you all. I'm sure we have run out of time for the show. I'd like to thank our guests in Pocatello, Randy Budge and Wendy Greenlow, and here in Boise, Virgil Moore and Steve Adler. Appreciate that. We'll have lots more information about the Idaho Wildlife Summit there, as I said, on the Dialogue website. We'll also continue this discussion for a little bit longer in Dialogue's Web Extra. You'll find it all at idahoptv.org. Just click on the Dialogue tab and you'll find us. I also invite you to become a friend on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. And if you send us an email question just now, I will get it in the Web Extra, so tune in. And thanks for joining us this time for Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.